Right, thank you. So welcome to guess this is meeting 6 now, a continuation of our conversation yesterday with the Air Toxic Science Advisory Committee, continued conversation on the TRV proposals. If we can go to the next slide. Just as a reminder for both our ATSAC members and our members who are joining from the public, our ATSAC members are panelists, so they will be having the ability to speak. We are recording this meeting, and that will be available on the Air Toxic Science Advisory Committee website, as well as if you weren't able to listen in yesterday, this is a continuation of that conversation. So there's reference materials and the recording that will be online. Closed captioning is available. If it helps your participation, you can click the CC button or close show captions on the bottom of your Zoom screen. And for members of the public, you aren't able to chat. You're not participating in this meeting. There is a public comment process and other ways to engage in the work of these TRV proposals and future rulemaking processes. And we talked about that yesterday. We're not going to reiterate all the process elements. The Q&A is also disabled, so it really is a conversation that's really centered and focused on the Science Advisory Committee members themselves. And with that, I don't think there's any more kind of opening that I'll do. Just want to welcome back folks. Again, we're going to kind of pick up where we left off yesterday, which was the beginning of the conversations, really diving into the documents. So we spent a lot of time yesterday on high-level process, and today we'll really be getting into some of the more depth of detail for that discussion. So Holly, I'm going to pass it to you. So just welcome back, everybody. Great to see you. And let's jump in. I think slide 15, maybe, Dana. Is that the place to start?
Yep. Thanks, Ben. Awesome. So Dana's bringing up slide 15, which is the section of questions where we left off yesterday. As a reminder for the attendees as well, we are working off of discussion questions that are online. We also emailed a Word version of them to ATSAC members. This is ATSAC document 3, the discussion questions. And today we're hoping to get through the questions related to document 4 for ATSAC, which is also posted online. This is that document where the proposed TRVs, where DEQ is the authoritative source in consultation with ATSAC. So I pulled up document 4 for today. I also pulled up the 2 workbooks. I think we'll probably look at some information in there today. So if we go to this first question on the next slide here, this is question 1 of the document 4 questions. And we talked through this one yesterday. And I just wanted to pause here in case there are additional thoughts on this question. And to kick it off, I know we ended up yesterday with a question from John Boudreau about one specific chemical. Let me look at my notes. It was on chromium-3 water-soluble compounds, as I remember, and this is on page 12 of document 4. And so we did a little bit of homework on this one. And to kick it off, I was thinking, Dave, you could kind of show us where you found the answer to this question, and then we could have a little discussion and spend some time on this question before we move on.
Yeah. And if Dana, if you can unshare, I'll share my screen. Yeah, so this is where this row here, 35 through 37, is the one for water-soluble trivalent chromium. And John, your question was, why did our DEQ proposed value is based off of this ATSDR one. And so your question was, why did we choose that one instead of the OWIHA value, since the OWIHA one was so recently published in 2022? And so the 2 reasons, which are written, I won't scroll over because it'll give you motion sickness. So but far to the right in the same row is a description of why. But to summarize it, the reason we picked this one is because even though the OWIHA value was more recently published, it was based on a study from 1979 whereas the ATSDR value was based on a study from 1999. So the underlying study was more recent. And the other reason was because if we selected the OEHA value and we applied the Tenberg-Haber's law to extrapolate that, to expand that time frame to a 24-hour exposure, this number would go below the chronic value for the same compound. So those are the two reasons. And like I say, that's why we talk here in ATSAC. So I'll stop sharing so we can talk about it. But if those were our reasons, and we're here to talk about whether those reasons are good or good enough. So
Yeah.
go ahead, John.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I don't know. There are times when, having the most recent data point is not necessarily, you can have an older study that's still more appropriate study for use. So that's not always the main issue. And what kind of raised my eyebrows a little bit was the fact that you were using a intermediate, subchronic study rather than an acute study, because usually preferentially you go with the acute number and not the subchronic. However, I went and did the derivation and found exactly what you were talking about the acute number being lower than the chronic number, and that's always problematic. So, I don't have any, in the end, I think you made the right decision, but just I wanted to hear just a little bit of discussion around that, about why that happened.
Yeah, thanks. John Vandenberg.
My question is actually for John Boudreau. I see that this uncertainty factor for animal to human was a 6. I think that's what that was when David had it up there. How often does the state use a 6 instead of a 3 or a 10? I'm just curious what the history has been there of that.
I couldn't tell you how often it gets used. Obviously, it does get used, but it's it's a more recent use of that particular uncertainty factor, having a 6 available in the older acute. We use older acute RELs. That particular uncertainty factor wasn't available.
I was just curious because you pointed out it's a fairly recent review, so I don't know if that's a fairly recent use of a 6. I'm just curious how the history there.
Right. Yeah. As far as how that is, let me go back and look at that.
Okay. I'm sorry to put you on the spot. I'm just curious. It's just curiosity on my part. No problem.
Well, and I won't speak for OHA and DQ, but I think that putting each other on the spot a little bit is part of why y'all are here. By challenging the expertise, utilizing the expertise, all of that is part of the discussion we're hoping to have. Daisy, jump in.
Sorry, I used my left hand to unmute. So in this case, I actually agree with you, use the ATSDR for different reasons, because the OEHA, the study is acute, but it's 30 minutes. And the ATSDR, even though it's not really acute, but I think the effect is a port of entry effect. So when you deal with the port of entry effect, I think, a lot of times you actually do, I think it's, to me, it's more, less uncertain than you extract from 30 minutes to 24 hours. And the 30 minutes, 30 minutes, it's not port of entry effect. So the other study is a port of entry effect, and it just, I feel like a less uncertain to derive like 24-hour, acute, and with the study with the port of entry effect, instead of with something only focus on 30 minutes. So, and then like you say, when you derive, you actually lower, if you extract lower than the chronic, so it's already kind of safe in a sense. So that's my opinion.
Thank you, Daisy. I guess for John Stanek or Susan, I mean, John Vandenberg, you, I think, posed the question. David, you've kind of outlined the approach that y'all use. Sounds like there's some general, agreement with the rationale, but I'm curious, Susan or John Stanek, did you have any additional thoughts, comments, or questions?
I don't have any other comments. I don't have any.
I don't have anything either right here.
And Daisy, is that a new hand or your old hand?
Old hand.
Okay.
I hope we get automatically lower.
And you also doing good with the hands. You can also, I can tell, like, folks come off, come on camera. I'll know that that signifies a raised hand too, generally speaking. I guess for David and Holly, given the conversation that folks just had, reflective, David, of what you brought into today, is there any other questions you have based on what folks have given you feedback on? Or you feel confident, kind of?
That was really helpful for me. That interchange was really helpful. So.
Okay, and then John Vandenberg, you started this, I think, with your question. So I guess, do you feel like that's resolved? You got the answer that you were seeking?
Yeah, it was actually John Boudreau that was asking. I'm good. Thank you.
John Boudreau was asking, sorry. I guess I could just say, John, you asked the question, and I'll have a pretty good likelihood of getting it right. Okay, thank you. Holly, was there any other follow-up from yesterday, or do you want to move into kind of question 2 on document 4?
I'm ready to move into question 2 to really start digging into document 4. Yeah. So maybe Dana, let's bring up the next one on slide. Yep, perfect. So I'll just read this question to set us up. This one's still on document 4. Are there any specific toxic air contaminants in section 2 to which Haber's law should not be applied to adjust exposure time? So this is kind of related to question 1, but just trying to make sure we're all good to go on section 2 of this document before we move on.
I'll just note, John Vandenberg, your comment yesterday, we have not adjusted the slide to put Haber's law in quotes, but your point still stands from yesterday.
Thank you. I see it. That's fine.
Yep. So just open it up, same process yesterday. I'd love to hear from each ATSAC member to the extent that you all, question each other and have dialogue. That's great as well, but just want to make sure we get everyone's input.
Just to be clear about the question, you're asking about both table, I gotta get the table straight here, I'm rolling here. Table 1 and table 2? Is that right? Both of them?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, because what I'm saying is on table 1, you're using the exponent of 1, I think in every case, correct? Oh, 1.33, sorry. I see that for both.
There's a 1.33 and a 1.5.
Okay.
But mostly ones, almost all ones.
Okay. And so, okay, I'm fine with that. I might have a question about the other tables too when we get to that, or do you want me to go ahead and say something now?
I think if it's related to the way that application to adjust exposure time, if there's concerns, regardless of the table, right, OHA, that's, you'd want to hear that.
Yeah.
Okay. So the question I've got about table 2, when you're going from longer to shorter, is where are you starting from to apply that? And my question is, here you've got times that are for 6 months or 90 days or 130 days. So depending upon how much in time coming back towards an acute time you're starting from, the value that results will be quite different. So can you kind of give us a picture of how you handle the different exposure durations in that calculation?
Yeah, and actually, this is a really good, I'm really glad we're talking about this. So I actually did not adjust exposure duration down to 24 hours. So I was starting from usually almost always the ATSDR intermediate MRL. And the only adjustment that I was making was to take out that intermittent component of the of the fraction. So taking out the days per week adjustment, and
Oh,
so that was so I didn't actually apply any other adjustment to go from, like, for example, on that bis
yeah,
2 chloroethyl ether, I did not do anything to go from that 130 down to 1 day. And we could, and that is possible. Like we could do that. I didn't, when ATSGR does their acute MRLs, which are meant to be applied for like up to 2 weeks, they say, like 1 day to 2 weeks, they often use studies that are kind of right at that 2-week level, and they don't adjust down to 24 hours, or I don't know. It works out better for them sometimes just because their definition of intermediate usually encompasses the amount of time in the study, right? Like, so they say 2 weeks up to a year. So like 130 days is like in their window of what an intermediate exposure is. So yeah, so that is something that we could talk about, if, like, instead of just taking out that intermittent part of that time adjustment, another way would be to just adjust total hours, and just, that, like, just figure out that, if it's 6 hours a day for 5 days a week for 130 days, that you could figure out like how many total hours is that, and then squish that all down to 24 hours.
yeah. I think probably that would be a mistake from my mind. I think the way you've done it is probably more health protective than to try to adjust for all those times, because if you adjust it for the total duration, you're going to have an acute value that's very, very high. Whereas when you're adjusting it to 5 to 7 days per week, which we say here, I think that you're being more protective. I'll put it that way.
Yeah,
But
the default
I thought it was worth talking about because you're listing the exposure duration here, and it seems like that would be relevant, but I'm not sure that I would apply that. So I just want to make sure we're all clear about that.
Right. I listed it for information, but I did not actually make any adjustment based on that exposure duration in table 2.
Okay. I think you kind of say that, but it might be.
We could make that more clear.
It might be to be a little bit more clear that there was no specific adjustment for the exposure duration, except for the days per week, which that's shown in the equation 5 here. But I was kind of going, well, what about the other part of it here? So you're saying you did not consider that, or did not apply anything related to that. I think I agree that's the right way to do it, but I think it could be more clear.
Okay.
That's good. Well, let's continue. John Stanek and then Daisy.
Clarify, you've left all the taking the like daily exposure and adjusting that to 24, right?
Yes, that is in there. Yeah, I
That's
did
all,
leave
and
an
that's been done
exposure.
in all these studies. Okay.
Yes.
Has there been,
Yeah.
picking up on something John just said though, is there any consideration of, I don't know, describing where you think these values then with this adjustment tend to end up, that they are more health protective because you're only able to adjust so much, or is that just something you don't want to get into? Or just something for you guys to think about, I think, is sort of describing, maybe it's not like a confidence level, but just, where you think these values might fall when you're extrapolating backwards.
You mean if I did adjust for duration, exposure duration down, and kind of squish that time down, like how that number would compare with?
No, I mean, just the adjustment you're making. I think John was alluding to this a little bit, that you probably are ending up with a more health protective acute value, going from a subchronic to a 24-hour value. I didn't know if it's something you thought about that's worth to just kind of put in the document, that how you feel these values might, I guess, qualitatively come out.
And is that like part of the intentionality of the decisions that that OHA was making in that? I think, John, you were getting to that place. If you make this decision, it could show a less health protective value versus if you do it this way, it has a more, like, are you erring on the side of health protection when you're making those type of choices for the ways that.
Yeah, just because you know, we don't really know, you know, unless you have the less than 24-hour exposure, you know, I guess.
That makes
More
sense.
like qualitative description of how you think the values are.
Yeah.
You know, the other way you could also show that is to show an example.
Yeah.
Because the way this is right now, you can interpret that a couple different ways perhaps, and I think having an example there would be useful for one of these cases.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That
like
makes
that.
sense.
Jump in, Daisy.
Yeah. So I think for the duration adjustment, it's a convention for most agency to just adjust the hourly and then days per week. So here, you know, whatever you guys did, I think it's very logic. You know, you just deleted the days per week adjustment. So to me, it's okay. I don't think it's if you like you know, total exposure, then use Haber's law to adjust. I never seen anyone do that. And another is like, can we go back to like one question, you know, the question we are working on first, because this jump to the another question. I have some comments on the table 1. So maybe we go, you know, follow your order. So it's easy that everyone on the same page instead of jump back and forth.
Oh,
Yeah,
sure.
I apologize for jumping ahead.
No, I'm just like I say, you know, I have some comments, maybe other have some comments on table 1. So then we move on, then, you know, it's just more, you know, interactive, more effective way of a discussion. So for table 1, I do have a comments for those and more than just one. As I think I already said yesterday, the empirical and only valid if the value was derived within the 24 hours. You cannot use most empirical and based on my experience, they derive maybe from like 10 minutes, 30 minutes to couple hours. So you cannot use this empirical and to extrapolate beyond your data point range. So in a sense, you know, the problem is for both cases, I can dig into the original study. You need to go into the original study. If it did not cover 24 hours, it's better to use default n equals 1. You know, any empirical, it just, you know, like we do standard curve, you cannot extrapolate more than the concentration range you tested. So another thing I mentioned yesterday is in your table, you have some place POD equals 1 hour IEF. I think it's conceptually not right. It's better to use their POD and then just, you know, apply, you know, whatever UF you have. So I go through all my comments, maybe one at a time. So for unit conversion, I also said yesterday, you know, it's better to you put the molecular weight there, divide by 24.45, and then equals then people can just calculate. And if you copy the molecular weight wrong or whatever, you know, it's more clear. And another thing is like standardization. You know, I'm not saying you have to change it, you know, for this, just for, you know, when you collect for the future, it's just better format. So use the POD to convert the concentration unit immediately. And then it's just a very straightforward. You know, I always like to see, okay, our human, you know, PRV compared to animal study, what kind of safety range you have. It's just ballpark, you look, you have some ideas. Yeah, this one I talked about. Let me go through my list. And for the DAF, you have some place to have a DAF. I think it's bad to specify what DAF is. You know, some you specify, some you know, do not specify. Like you know, I think diethylene laminin. You know, the DF is equal RDDR. You know, you just put a DF, and sometimes you do have, you know, so it's what kind of, you know. And also for the heptane, I have I think your rule said when there's when the 1 hour value, reference value is from other agency. So they extract from like 30 minutes to 1 hour, you will use their 1 hour. So this case, you're actually not using their 1 hour, you're using their 30 minutes POD. So I think it's a matter of consistency. But I think your rule actually is better because you use 1 hour. The reason is, I haven't seen a single case to say your rule is better, but I mean, in the future, if like OEHA or TCEQ derive the 1 hour POD based on a specific N, then it makes sense to use the 1 hour instead of the original one, because you want that N to be incorporated there. But in this one, I see some inconsistent. Your rule said that you use 1 hour, and then in this case, you just use the raw half an hour POD. So I think it's just some consistency, and also the unit conversion for this one, you didn't, give it the final value. This one, see, this one you list the molecular weight divided by the, the normal volume of the gas, ideal gas, but you didn't give the weight. Yeah, the POD comments are the same. And if the unit conversion is not necessary because the starting unit is the concentration, I think you don't need to say anything, just delete, because you don't need to use it anyway. That's just my comments. Okay.
Any reflection?
I'm writing all that down.
A lot of it's.
Yeah, I sent you. I made all my comments on my, stuff. I sent you. Don't write down. Let me go through. I just in some cases, I was like mark on this. Okay, I think that's all my comments I have for table 1. Yeah.
That's good. Thank you. So I appreciate some granularity in those, the very specific, and also some longer term consistency kind of process questions. I guess just going back to the high level question that's asked and kind of seeking if there's anywhere where Haber's law, where that adjustment to exposure, we've talked about kind of the mechanics of that, but are there any specific contaminants that you see in section 2 where Haber's law or the application should not be applied? Like, is there any places of concern? That's the question y'all are trying to get to.
But I do appreciate Daisy's idea of like going to table, like maybe like first narrow that down to the ones that are in table 1, and then we move to table 2. Does anyone else have things to say about table 1?
I guess just for the record, it looks good to me.
Thanks. Other questions? Or comments on John Boudreau?
No, I was just going to chime in and say, looks good to me too.
Okay. And so table 1, any other comments? That was the shorter to longer, and then maybe we move from table 2 that's longer to shorter. Is that, you want to work through it like that? Okay.
Yeah.
So if there's no more comments on kind of table 1, same kind of process that we just went through around table 2. Daisy, I don't know if you wanted to get us started, because it sounds like you had some kind of very specific.
I get started with table 2. So I have some comments here. So overall, I agree with this approach, because most agencies, including ours, we just use when we do the subchronic or chronic, we always adjust hourly and then days per week. That's 2 duration adjustment fact. So ATSAC, I think they use this for their whatever intermediate value or chronic value. So I think it's good if you don't have a acute value, you use intermediate, and you just get rid of the days per week adjustment. But I have some terminology here. So I think here maybe incorporate yesterday John's comments, because this value you actually calculate. So put the significant digit here, like how many for your calculation, how many significant digits you want. And this is a good place to put it, because that's the value you calculate. And for the formula, I have some, I think, terminology. You said the proposed acute TRV equals subchronic TRV. So the subchronic is not TRV. TRV is DEQ's definition. So I would think that maybe here better to use the terminology subchronic reference value. So reference value can anything like ATS data is, the MIL or TCEQ's IEV or, or EHA's IEL. It can refer to anyone. Because if you like a subchronic TRV, it's your terminology. So I think it's better to use more, wide, just reference value something. And divide by days per week. The days per week here is also not correct because it's an adjustment fact. So the true value is the days per week in animal study divided by days per week in the human. So normal animal is 5 days per week and human is 7 days. That's what we consider, for the subchronic chronic. So I think it's better to say days per week adjustment. So it's adjustment. If days per week give people a wrong conception, like in the below you say 5, 7, you say 5 days, 7 weeks, it's just a little bit confusing. I think it's adjustment. So days per week adjustment fact actually. It's just like in animal study, we normally do 5 days exposure per week. But when we do like bystander average person, we suppose they exposed to every day, constantly. And so I think also in the table, I think it's better say days per week adjustment, something like that. It's just more clear. Yeah, that's all. Actually, overall, I agree with your approach. So it's just some terminology. That's all I have for this table. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, very helpful.
Personal question around why animals get a 5-day week and we get a 7-day week, but we'll hold that for another day. Other ATSAC members, John Vandenberg, jump in.
So I think along the same lines of being clear about terminology, with the PPRTVs as used here, they should have a subchronic P, lowercase p dash RFC. It's just be clear about the terminology because the RFD is specific to the IRIS program, not to the PPRTVs. That's my only comment on that.
So that'd be a subscript on like a P subscript on the when there's subchronic PPRTVs or subchronic sub P.
No, it's not a sub P. It's actually, I'm looking at one right now. It's the standard letter P lowercase dash RFD. I'm sorry, PRFC. Oh, is that right? Let me look at it here again. I just encourage you to check and make sure you're using the right.
We can do that.
Acronym or abbreviation here. Yeah.
Okay.
We appreciate that, especially this check to make sure we're as accurate and specific as possible. So thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, John. John, Susan, any additional comments, questions, concerns around table 2? Yeah, Susan.
I don't have any other concerns about table 2. I had brought some points up yesterday, and I think they were reflected in some of John and Daisy's comments on just in terms of clarity in the approach that was taken for table 2 in terms of days per week. One comment I guess I had just in terms of question 2 generally about potentially chemicals that would not apply to Haber's law. I was going back to the workbook to look at some of these and just determine the endpoint that was used for point of departure. And in this case, I was really focusing on the column that said description of endpoints, the basis for point of departure. And some of them just list multiple endpoints. And I realized later, even though it's, possibly really clear. There's a whole other column labeled target organ, and then I think it's broken down there possibly where the point of departure is, but I just didn't know. I was trying to look through. It seems like the information it's in the column for basis of point of departure I just didn't know how consistently that was used. So I guess, you know, just in making sure that it's clear, you know, for each data point, and especially if you're going to be going back in and adding point of departure into the tables, just what endpoint was used for that calculation. And that was my only comment.
Okay, yeah, thanks. That's helpful.
John Boudreau?
Nothing additional to add.
Okay, thank you. John Stanek, anything from you?
No.
Okay. So any final comments on
I do
John?
have one quick one. So just
Yeah.
to make a point about the example here, if you look in table, I think this is table 2. Gotta roll down. Yeah, table 2. If you go down a couple of pages, you'll see the chemical diethylene glycol monoethyl ether. And here it says the 2009 PPRTV subchronic REL. So I think, are you all using REL as a generic term? Because that should be the subchronic provisional RFC, I think, right there.
Yeah, that is a typo. That's
Okay.
a good catch.
Okay, just
That should be PPRTV. That should be an RFC. Yeah.
Should be an RFC. And then a little bit further down, ethylene glycol monomethyl ether acetate. It just says 2011 PPRTV, which is just, it's a link. I know that the point of that is a link to the document, but it's just a little inconsistent whether you're saying it's an intermediate MRL for ATSDR. You know, consistency I think is always helpful here. And again, we're being kind of nitpicky here, but that is helpful just to be as clear as possible.
That's great.
That's helpful. Yeah.
Is it the same typo for monoethyl ether and
I have to click
yeah.
on it and see. I think it is. So
Yeah.
Since it's JR Giska, John Boudreau, John Stanek, John Vanver, we should just use JR for one, JB for the other, JS and JV. Then we're sure which John we're talking about. All right.
JV. All right. Thanks, JV. Okay. I'm getting that habit. Okay. Any other thoughts on this piece? Table 2, kind of moving from adjusting from longer to shorter. John Boudreau, did you have another?
Really just I came up with an answer for JV. As far as the that interspecies uncertainty factor of 6, generally what we uses is 2 if it's a human equivalent concentration used, square root of 10 if no PBPK or HEC, and then for the toxicodynamic portion of that, square root of 10 for non-primate studies. So I think it's going to be fairly common to start seeing more
and more
factors of 6 in that.
Square root of 10 rounded to 3.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, thanks for the follow-up.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, should we keep moving? So now we'll go into section 3, table 2. Holly, do you want to introduce that? Right, so moving to that kind of lesser stuff, but similar structure.
Yeah. Dana, could you pull up slide 18, just so we can all look at the next question together, get situated? Okay, so question 3 of this document is referring to the next section, which is section 3 of that document. What feedback or concerns do you have about the cases where DEQ proposes to apply toxicity information from a better studied toxic air contaminant to a lesser studied structurally similar toxic air contaminant? So we can leave it at that and put the question in the chat.
This is table 2 under section 3, right, with the 5.
Yes, and I'm realizing it should be table 3, so we will double check all of our table numbers. I thought we
Yeah.
double checked all that.
Sorry that we have
Table-
2 table 2s.
Yeah, or it's table 1 under section 3, one or the other, right? So,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
it's probably table 3. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Anyways, hopefully folks know where we're going. Susan Tilton, you want to start us off? I just saw you on,
Sorry, I was reading other things, so,
I don't have to start with you. I saw you off camera and off mute, so that's why I called on you.
okay,
You can get settled.
all right.
JV,
Thank you. I looked at crotonaldehyde and I was trying to understand this because first off, I really appreciate the narratives. I think that's very helpful. And it leads the reader to kind of follow your logic and the basis for your decisions, which is appropriate. But when I got to the second paragraph here, I got kind of lost because I couldn't trace this back through workbook 2. And I think that's what I should be looking at, right? Is workbook 2 for the DEQ proposed to apply the relative potency factor to the chronic TRV for acrolein rather than TCEQs. But when I go to table 2, I don't see that. I don't see the TCEQ listed there anywhere. So I'm kind of lost here. So what you actually did for this one. And maybe I'm not looking in the right place. So I apologize if that's the case.
Yeah, so the starting point for the chronic value for crotonaldehyde is actually the same starting point we used for acrolein. So basically we're saying we agree with TCEQ's argument that acrolein is a good surrogate for crotonaldehyde, but we didn't use Texas's number for acrolein. We used a different agency's number for acrolein. So we don't actually reference TCEQ in the workbook because that's not what we derived the value from. It came from, we're just applying their logic that acrolein is a good surrogate for crotonaldehyde. But we used, do you see what I mean?
Yeah, so I guess what I was confused about was why I didn't see TCEQ in workbook 2, because I see ATSGR, IRIS, OEHA, but I didn't see TCEQ there. So that's why I was trying to trace back to follow your logic through. I go, well, where's the TCEQ listing here? And it's not there in workbook 2. You follow where I'm coming?
Yeah. We didn't generally add TCEQ values to our workbook 2 unless that was the one we were proposing to use, just because it's not listed as an authoritative source.
Right. Yeah, I know that. Right. But you are using it here. That's the difficulty I have. It's being used here.
is it just because like the other authoritative sources do not have a value for this, and so you found a
right? But we're not using the TCEQ value for chronic crotonaldehyde. We're just applying a logic from there.
Which is the factor 3? Is that the logic? That's the point?
Yeah, the logic is that for the borrowed logic from TCEQ is that acrolein is a good surrogate for crotonaldehyde, but we used we used the ATSDR value for acrolein for chronic, right, rather than the TCEQ one. So that's the number that's getting referenced by.
So you're using that as the logic for why you're using a relative potency factor of 3 is based on the logic for TCEQ, but not the actual analysis that they did, except for that factor of 3.
Right. The listing in the row comes from the point of where the point of departure came from, which was not coming from TCEQ.
Okay. I think I can follow that now. But the other problem I had, again, when I dug into this, I thought, well, what's going on here? Because the IRIS value there in workbook 2, I think, is incorrect. And so it's like, well, where'd that come from? I think that's just a typo. It's off by a factor of 10. It should be 0.2 instead of 0.02 in workbook 2 for acrolein.
You're on the chronic tab, right?
I'm on the chronic tab, yeah.
Okay.
I think I'm on the chronic tab.
Yeah, the yellow is, yeah.
Yeah, yellow, yeah. So just a small point. Again, I was kind of going, now I'm kind of doubly confused. So I think that's just a simple typo. But your logic for the TCEQ is the basis relative potency factor. I follow that now. So thank you very much. So I'm good with that.
We'll make that more clear too. I put that as an action item for us in the narrative, and we'll make sure to triple check that value and make sure that iris value is correct. So
Right.
thank you.
Hopefully the stakes for that error are low in the sense that it was the ATSGR value and not the iris one that we actually are proposing to use. But we want our table to be correct. So that is
well, when you've got 20,000
catch.
dealing with, there can be a few that are not quite. It's still meeting the quality control requirements, so that's good. So, okay.
But John, you weren't just. Were you offering any challenge to, like, now that we've kind of resolved some of the understanding of kind of where and how it was structured, do you have any concerns about kind of the approach and using acrolein as a surrogate in this case?
So I'm glad you asked the question. I guess my view is when you've got a chemical that may be important, like protonaldehyde, if you don't have a way to derive a value, you need to derive it somehow. And this is very well documented. The narratives make sense to me. So I'm good with that. And I'm actually good with the other ones. I don't have, it's in some ways the more impactful ones are PBBs and the PBDDs. Those are the ones that there's much more concern perhaps about the exposure to. And again, I think that using the brominated analogs for PCBs, from PCBs for the PBBs is appropriate. And I think that you've identified, and I think again, the link there for the PBBs and the PBDDs is what we had commented about a year ago or sometime or other. Okay.
Right. That was a specific, that was a separate email that we sent through ATSAC. Yeah. So we hoped that discussion's hopefully been had, was the idea. Yeah,
that's right. So I, and I think I commented, I'm not that Vandenberg, I'm another Vandenberg. Okay. But I commented, I think at that time about that was to me an appropriate approach to do for those two, which to me, in my own mind, those are the most impactful ones, which is why you sent the question out specifically to look at those two. I don't have any issue with the others here at all, so I'm good.
Okay, thank you. Do we need to clarify that it's a different Van Den Berg et al?
No.
Referencing thanks, John.
I think that the V on that Vandenberg may be a lowercase v, actually.
Oh yeah, lowercase v, lowercase d.
It might be. You need to look if the name of I'm trying to think who that is. Maybe I can't remember the first name, but if they're listed in a list of publications with someone like Linda Birnbaum has published with Vandenberg, I think if it's the first author, they use the capital V. If it's not the first author, it's a lowercase v. This is back to the old country. I don't know. Okay.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. JR, you had come on video. Did you want to? We might have moved past the conversation.
No. I think Holly addressed it. I think it's just updating the narrative to make that more clear.
Okay.
Thank you, John.
It's also like we could have a competition and we could say PBB and PBDD fast 5 times in a row, but other folks around kind of this overarching question around the kind of surrogate approach for these 5 rows or so of.
I also want to add, in the conversation we just had, we're referencing a old previous email thread that we had sent out, and we did compile that email thread and everybody's responses at the time into a document, and I'll put that in the chat if that helps refresh.
Yeah, I've got that. I've got that, Holly. I forgot.
Thanks. It helps refresh people's memories of where we've been.
Okay. So that was from JV. That was a good maybe example of both kind of validating the approach while also getting clarity around the level of detail that makes that approach make sense. So I guess just opening it up to other ATSAC members. if there's feedback or concerns around these examples that are in what will be future table 3 under section 3. Yeah, I want to bring folks up. David for putting it in. Daisy, jump in.
Yeah, this table 3, I looked through, I kind of agree with all your approach. So I just have a question about so I saw there's the chemical, is it all chemical in this document is also in the workbook too? It seems some in different.
Yes,
worksheet.
they are. One thing to note about workbook 2 is that so the ones that are showed up in the colored tabs are the criteria to be in those tabs is that it's a change from last year, from original, and that there's multiple options. So if both of those conditions aren't met, then it's still in workbook 2, but then it's in one of the appendix tabs.
Okay, now I got it.
So
okay, so I think that's good. So I was thinking, try to find in different worksheet.
right. So crotonaldehyde won't be in the yellow tab, for instance, because there was only one option for it.
Okay. So I did find an error in this one. just want you to say, the TCEQ's chronic IV for acronym is not 8.1, it's 2.7. Yeah, I think in your table, suppose table 3, first row. Yeah, I think 8.1 is already times the string, the value TCEQ for this chemical. So the acronym for TCEQ actually is 2.7. So
Okay.
yeah, just
Thank you.
a copy transcriber error, right?
Yeah, we'll dig that up. Thank you.
Yeah. I think that's all I have for this table.
Right. Thanks, Stacy. And so, yeah, and your overall was you really broadly agree with the approach that was used. JS, JB, Susan, John Boudreau, jump in.
One comment on N-propylbenzene. In the narrative supporting information, therefore DEQ proposes to use all TRVs proposed for ethylbenzene to N-propylbenzene. But you can't look at that or the next column over the proposed TRV value. There's no association of which endpoints you're using with which agencies. And I probably just tripped all over that, but for example, was AWIA responsible for the cancer number? Was ATSDR responsible for the acute number? That's it would be nice to, you could even put that in parentheses in the last sentence of the supporting information column.
So mapping it back to the reference.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll do that.
Yep. Thanks, John. Thanks, Holly. Any other, just John, high level agreement on approach, disagreement?
No, this is fine. I mean, I've been involved in reviewing a lot of PPRTVs lately where surrogate approaches are a lot more widespread. So no, this is good to see, to try and make the most of available closely related chemicals that we can.
That's helpful. Yeah, thanks, John. Susan?
Yeah, I agree with the approach. I didn't have any concerns about groupings that were discussed in the table, and really not any different than some of the other comments I provided earlier in the year, last year.
Awesome. Thank you, Susan. Well, let's keep going. Maybe we can get through one more section on uncertainty factors. So same thing, Holly, if you want to bring up the questions. And so this is DEQ proposing to modify uncertainty factors.
Yeah.
question, same kind of conceptual question, feedback, concerns, and really trying to assess overall agreement with the approach and utilization of shifting uncertainty factors. But yeah, Holly.
Yeah, so this question number 4, is referring to section number 4 of this document, which starts on page 19 of document 4. So this question is, what feedback or concerns do you have about cases where DEQ proposes to modify TRVs by changing uncertainty factors?
A little question in the chat, take it down and open it up. JV.
So what you're seeing here, I think, is worth some discussion, and that is, and it's going to come up even more later when we get into the issue about using Minnesota for the other chemicals, is it's kind of, there's a surgical approach here to identify another state that is not listed as an authoritative value, an authoritative source. Okay, so here it's Texas, and other cases might be New Jersey, might be TCEQ, might be Minnesota, you know, whatever. So in the overall scheme of things, is there a discussion anywhere about that sort of surgical selection of what have not been labeled as authoritative sources, or is the authoritative sources part of the rulemaking now? Or can you give us a little bit of background to how authoritative sources fit in and non-authoritative sources fit in?
Want me to take that one, or do you want to go, Holly?
I can kick it off and let me know if I leave anything out of it. But yes, so the authoritative sources are in Oregon Administrative Rule, and those are the ones that we've covered and we reviewed, kind of that we put in the TRV tool and you see in the workbook. So like EPA, ATSDR. And then after our original ATSAC meeting number 2, we listened to feedback during that meeting, and we heard from some of you and some of the other members at the time that it would be helpful in cases where we don't have information from our authoritative sources to look at other agencies that might have developed a value, and maybe we're relying on some toxicity information and we could take a closer look. So we developed in our kind of like our updates document after meeting number 2, we laid out in a paragraph that we would take a look at some of these other state agencies, such as TCEQ, in cases where no other authoritative sources had information. So that's when we started to look elsewhere. And they're also, so that's like one case.
Okay. Then
I also want to mention another piece of this that happened is we developed a list of, I forget how many, of chemicals. It was a pretty short list, and we can send a link to this memo as well, where we had our contractor, Eastern Research Group, take a look for other toxicity values that have been developed by other organizations internationally, the state level, federal level, for a short list of chemicals that we were really interested in our state, whether that was due to exposure or potential for health issues or hazards. We developed that short list. So those are the 2 ways we were kind of pulling from other organizations. Does that help? And Dave, did I miss anything?
So, but I guess my question is, does the rulemaking allows sort of, I don't know if exceptions is the right word, but additions to the process outside of the authoritative source? Right. The rulemaking allows that. And as you just described it, you went to some places, but it's not like a national exhaustive evaluation of other states, because you didn't include Connecticut or New York, I don't think. You did have New Jersey. So I just want to make sure I understand the scope of that and how you.
Yeah, so when for that subset, I think it's 22 or 23 chemicals, the PFAS chemicals plus the methyl naphthalenes were the main ones that that ERG searched for. We asked them to look at all 50 states and then some international sources too, like Australia, European Union, Canada. And so So those, for that subset that's in the link I put in the chat there, they were pretty comprehensive. They looked kind of everywhere. For those. If it wasn't on that list, then it was kind of like the main ones we went to were like Texas, Minnesota were kind of like the main two we would check if none of our normal authoritative sources had a value.
It sounds like, John, you're asking for some of that maybe to be laid out in the kind of section description, right? Because otherwise you're like, well, why did you pick Minneapolis or Minnesota? What did you exclude?
I think that would be useful. And exactly where it would fit, I don't know, but we've talked about TCEQ before we got to this point. So I don't know where in the documentation, but you do have a report here, and it would be good to refer to that, I think, somewhere as an example of that. And again, I applaud your approach. I'm not questioning. I think it's the right way to go. But I think it could be more clear if you add a little bit more descriptive, because this is a very brief description here. You got really 2 sentences. So I think a little bit more information would help the reader of this to be able to understand kind of a broader context that you're actually working in. And I think what you've done is great. So I definitely in agreement with it. So, but thank you for the description. That was very, very helpful to me.
And then I guess is the other side of that, maybe I heard this in your question as well, John, for OHADQ. These ultimately are within OAR's administrative authority for DEQ to become the source. And this is how you're becoming the source, right? You're documenting DEQ would be the source going forward. And this is the methodology that you're using to get there.
Yeah, right. So on the last rulemaking that we did, one of the changes to our authoritative source list was DEQ in consultation with ATSAC becoming an authoritative source in Oregon administrative rule. And that's how all of these in this document would fit into our rules.
Did you get much input during the stage of public comment on the rulemaking that I know comes later about that rulemaking that you're working under now, about other states that should be considered authoritative? I'm just curious if you got much in the way of public comments, if you can recall.
I feel like we didn't get very many comments about that, like additional states that we should.
Okay, I'm just curious about it.
I'm not remembering. It was in 2021 that we finished that rulemaking. And then I know when we had the second ATSAC meeting, I think that's when I really clued into the TCEQ, and that came up in our ATSAC discussions. I think that's when we looped that into our workflow.
Right.
But I'd have to go back and look.
But it does seem like this is why this conversation and this portion of discussion for ATSAC and for DEQ is so important. Because it would be DEQ as the authoritative source. And so to the extent that you all have identified any of those concerns, or you're going in the wrong direction here, or you're referencing the wrong other source, that's really important, because I do think, John, maybe you're previewing what people could then argue, right? Well, you're the authoritative source, but did you look at New York? Did you look at Connecticut? Look at somewhere else? And so I think both that introduction description, but also really just emphasizing, y'all's ability to critique where it makes sense to ensure that, y'all have, DEQ has the best standing as it goes forward into the kind of public and political process, that the science and the rationale and the methodology has been vetted.
Well put.
Yeah, thank you. Daisy, you're on camera. You want to jump in? Yep.
Yeah. So I actually agree with John, JV. I think it's a little bit of discretion in at the introduction, because you're not just going to TCEQ, you're also going into ATSDR's intermediate MIL. So ATSDR is your authority, source. So maybe just explain why, because you couldn't find the chronic value, so you kind of use intermediate. Just a little bit more clear, explain, that whatever in this table, so it will be helpful. I do have one specific comments about I agree all your, all this, because you try to unify, even you want to use other agency's POD, you still want to conform the authority's, uncertainty factor default value. I see your logic behind this. So for the NHEXIC, excuse me if I pronounce wrong, I can never pronounce all this chemical correctly. So the you said the TCEQ is 180 for the uncertainty fact, total uncertainty fact, and you change it to 3. And I calculate, if you change it to 3, it shouldn't be 300. It should be somewhere 270. I think you are trying to say there's maybe 2 half log effect there. But check, there's no 2 half log, only 1 half log. So all, based on, my agency and others, if we have 2 half log, we round it to 10. If we only have 1 half log, we always just use 3. I don't know, what your standard, but here I think it's better to, if 1 half log, then you use like 3. And if you have 2 half log, right, like you interspecies, you have both, then you can round it to 10. And also this here, you said the proposed acute TRV equals low L divided by UF. The low L is not a correct term because you don't use just POD to divide. I think it's more in the original document, they actually already calculate HEC. Even though, the value is same, it's still 1000 ppm, but the concept is different. Because if it's low L imply no HEC, but they actually did the HEC. So I think maybe better to use POD HEC, something like that.
Maybe a low L with the subscript HEC.
Yeah. It's low L is normally when we do low L is very I know it's a little bit hard for you guys because for us we define everything in front, so it's easy. For this one, if you look at to TCEQ's original document, they first did the low L, and I think it's not really 20-hour study, but I think it's okay to run to 24-hour. Don't need adjustment. That's fine with me. And then they actually do the HEC. It's HEC divided by the total, because of the total, let me see, the total uncertainty factor is, the reason why I say because the interspecies is a string. So when you use the interspecies string, you already calculate the HEC. That's why last time I reminded when in your workbook, if the DF equals 1, whatever, you need to say yes, HEC, because the UFA is different. If no HEC, the interspecies normally equals the default to 10. But when they do the human equivalent concentration adjustment, they just assume the TK, the connected part is, taken care of. So they only, normally you will see the interspecies to 3 or 6 in the OEHAS one. Different agencies using different. So I think, low L just give you a, kind of wrong impression. It was like you use some kind of raw POD without any adjustment. Yeah. I thought the other members can chime in, but it just to me is I never see people just use low L divided by UM. So yeah.
So I hear you say, but so the equals 1000 parts per million over 300. The
value is
doesn't change, but the description you're saying, right, Daisy?
I'm sorry.
Like the calculation doesn't change.
Yeah, the calculation is same.
Okay.
Calculation is same. The value is 1000 ppm, but the concept is different. It's not lower. It's already POD HEC.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and for that uncertainty factor, I think so. What I actually did was rounding, right? Like it does calculate to 270, which I rounded to 300, but I didn't say that I rounded to 300. So that's what I need to make
you
explicit.
say wrong. I think uncertainty factor. I tend not to round because I haven't seen anyone round the uncertainty factor. A lot actually is not round because a lot of agency we apply why sometimes 3 times 3 equals 10 because the 3 is a half log. So there's 2 half log in it's interspecies We normally say TK is a half log, TD is another half log. Interspecies, some agents, not using half log, but most are using half log for TK, half log. And then when you have two half log, then you actually round to 10. It's not round to 10 because you're supposed to 10 too. And so
Oh, I see.
Our policy is if a singular, if you only have one half log, then just round to 3. If you have two half log, then we round to 10. So I don't think it's not like your TRV, finally you have 2 significant digits. So you just get rid of the other, keep 2. But this uncertainty thing, I haven't seen people round, but I could be wrong. It's just, based on my experience, it was always like if you have a single, then do 3. If it's double, then you round it. But see, the database uncertainty factor 3 here is not half log. It's just 3. So you have to see where the half log come from. So that's my, my comment. So, but it's up to you guys. I think it's anyway, it's fine as long as you agree. Like I said, we always have like a SOP. We define all this and how we run each of these, and then we just follow our rule. If you follow your rule, it really won't make that much. The uncertainty factor, 300, 3,000. What difference make a 3 versus 10? Honestly speaking, as a risk assessor, it's not that much difference with such a high uncertainty factor. So yeah, I just want say like you have some idea like and just stick to whatever rule you decide. So
Thank you. Let's go, John Stan.
Yeah, I agree in that one part where the HEC was probably already considered. We would have just, we would have either written that as a low L HEC before the uncertainty factors or POD HEC, however you want to do it. I did notice though in the narrative for acetone and maybe somewhere else, at least for us, the low AL to no AL uncertainty factor is a full 10. Our standard is not 3. I don't know how it is for other agencies, but I know that's how it is for us.
Yeah, I know I know that ATSGR and sometimes IRIS will have like a 3 if the effect is either if the effect is small or if they have a reason to think that they're not that far from a NOEL, then sometimes they will. And I think OEHA I think does this also. Like if I think they call it like ATSGR calls it like a minimal low L, something like that, a severe or minimal low L.
If it's severe, they use 10. If a minimal, they use 3. Yeah. OEHA.
Yeah, but for us it's a full 10, so that's not all authoritative sources. And for us to use a minimal requires a lot of justification to move off that, especially, considering we do a lot of benchmark modeling. Since we tend to have a lot of dose response information for our assessments. I just want to make sure you're consistent that's not, we rarely move off of that.
I think OEHA does it. We also use 10 unless we have our default like a DPR, my agency. Also use like a default 10 unless we have a very good reason to reduce to 3. So we actually also default to 10. But I think OEHA I know like a minimal or severe 3 and 10.
John Boudreau.
Well, it's a titch more complicated than that. For chronic RELs, it's either 1 for a NOEL or benchmark, 10 for a LOAEL. However, for acute RELs, there's a 6 if it's a mild effect, 10 if it's a severe effect with a low L. So
what does that mean for OHA DQ with what's on the page here?
Right. I mean, would you recommend that we change this NOEL uncertainty factor from a 2? So Texas used a 2. Should we make that a 10? Like, is that a recommendation?
Well, John Stanek, you had, I think.
I guess, I mean, I guess that would be a recommendation just because it wouldn't be consistent with EPA's approach in developing a chronic value.
This seems like a point I'd love to hear from the group on kind of where, when I hear OHA or DQ asking for a recommendation, I think it's an important place to hear from everyone. So, John, John Stanek, hearing you kind of making a change consistent with EPA. John Boudreau.
I would agree with that. I would go with the 10.
I agree as well. It's John Vandenberg.
Yep. Susan.
I mean, I agree. We'll defer to the regulators, so.
Okay. Daisy.
I actually not really think that we need to go down. We need to look at, I would suggest to go look into the TCEQ study, because the reason why I think the TCEQ also know a lot of agency default to 10. So I guess if you kind of already rely TCEQ to do the analysis, so you kind of, you suddenly change it's not like, oh, pick and choose. To me, maybe it's better just if they use 2, they got to be a reason. My thinking is like, I don't think they default to 2 unless they default to 2. Like John said, most people, most agencies, the default is 10. But if they use a 2, I assume there's a reason. I haven't looked into the detailed study. So to me, it will be case by case. If they use a 2, that means that, they have evidence show it's a minor effect. And the minor effect, like us, we also use, when we have evidence to prove it's a minor effect, we just use 3. But if we don't have evidence to prove it's a minor effect, then we default to 10. So here it's not really a default. It's more like you already rely on TCEQ to do the analysis, and they just use 2. It means it's not that. Or they're, there's some kind of, is it BCL? No, it's L, low L.
So I clicked on the link there, and if you do so, you can see their rationale. I don't see a page number here, unfortunately, but you can. Oh, it's page 24. I'm sorry. The bottom of page 23, if you go to that link for acetone, and there's a sentence there that you can read. I'll read it for those. It says a minimal UFL, which is low L to no L, that's what we're talking about, right? Of 2 was used since the application of this value to the low L, 375 to estimated no L, would result in a concentration well within the range of exposure. Yeah, right there you have it. Not associated with increased symptomology. I'm not sure that's a very good rationale, actually.
A minimum UFL was used since the beginning.
Can you increase the size that a little bit?
Oh yeah. Let's see. I'm bad at Zoom. Here we go.
There you go. Thank you. You got to read below it too, I think. There you go. That's the whole rationale is that one sentence.
And is TCEQ the only ones that are using it too? Because it sounds like what I've heard from other folks is like agencies are defaulting to 10. If 2 has a solid rationale, that might be right to Daisy, your point. There's case by case where there's a solid rationale, and now you're looking at a rationale where it's maybe, at least for John Vandenberg to start, right, maybe not as compelling as one might hope, if that's going to be the rationale you're using to make.
Do we know the effect? Do we know the effect? Where the effect?
I will unshare first and find
I think
it.
the reasoning to me is reasonable, but if the effect is severe, maybe we go to 10. But if the effect is not that severe, this reason is we always also consider this as well.
It says that the POD is based on neurological effects, but I don't know what.
Oh, okay, then it's a kind of not so minor neurological effect. Yeah.
But David, Holly, what are you hearing in this, right? Like, so it seems like there's some general agreement that whereas you all are defaulting to consistency and alignment with the ways that other agencies are doing this, that's kind of a safe path. There may be alternatives here, but what are you hearing? Because I'm.
Yeah,
absolutely
go ahead, Holly.
I think what we need to do is read through this TCEQ document again because it's been a while. And so we'll do our homework and look at it. And maybe even if we have a little break too, that would be a good chance for Dave and I to look through it a little bit more in depth. But this is all very helpful, knowing what agencies normally do and then seeing what we can find to match in this document. So we will definitely work on this.
Okay.
Yeah.
It looks like page 23 of that document is the one to focus on.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, you are teeing up then potentially a pausing point, but before we do that, I just want to make sure we kind of close the loop on this, right? So as think about any other comments around the uncertainty factors in this section. Obviously, there's a lot of feedback and some homework or break work that can happen. John Boudreau, you had come off mute a little bit ago. Did you want to add something?
No, I think everything's been covered.
Okay. So any last thoughts on this section?
Yeah, just one. It would probably also then apply to whatever's going on with N-hexane, where it
Yeah,
specifically points out a minimal low AL.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. And remind me, we go to what, 2:30? Is that right?
I'm looking at the calendar.
I think that's right. So
Yes, 2:30. Yep.
we take 19 minutes. Hopefully that'll give a little bit of time for you all to digest a couple pages there. Folks to get a stretch, maybe some snacks, whatever suits you. Are folks good coming back at 1:10?
Sounds fine. 110 or
4:10 your time,
yeah, that's fine.
unless you could go back in time some weird way. Okay, for 1:10 p.m. Pacific Standard, you can do the appropriate adjustments. We'll see you in just under 20 minutes. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Okay, 110. I was right on the verge of getting distracted for about another 30 minutes with side conversations and other work. So welcome folks back. Thanks, Daisy. So folks can pop on screen or a thumbs up somewhere, unmute. There you go. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, looks like we have critical mass. So I guess let's start maybe OJ, anything you want to report back on from the pre-break homework assignment?
Yeah, Holly and I had a chance to huddle and regroup, and I think we would really like to, if we can, I think we can walk the group through these these acetone and hexane, which have exactly the same issue for their in this table here, where there's a low L to no L adjustment that Texas applied a 2, and that we want to just make sure we get like kind of the final take. So to do that, we didn't. Although we did have time to huddle, I didn't have time to make a slide. So I'm gonna have to walk you through it.
Yeah.
I'll have to scroll through the documents a little bit. Okay, so we'll do acetone first, if that's okay. So for acetone, this is the Texas document for acetone, and here is their description of the critical effect. So it was neurotoxicity, heavy feelings in the head, faint feelings, nausea. That was the critical effect that they saw in the workers. Then they go on to say, so that was a neurotoxic kind of effect. And then I think the next important thing is here at the bottom of page 23 and top of 24, where they're saying, so they're not really saying that the effect was minimal, they weren't really saying that the effect wasn't severe. Their argument is that if you divide this low well by 2, then it puts you down to a range that is, from other studies, I assume, less than 250 parts per million that have not been associated with these kinds of symptoms. So that is their argument for making it a 2 instead of a 10. And I assume that this 250 is coming from other studies instead of this study, or else they would have just made that a no L instead of going with this low L. So I think that's pretty much the setup for acetone. So, and I think, and I can walk you through a similar thing for N-hexane once we finish this one. Does that sound okay? So I guess what I hope to get, hearing all that, whether ATSAC thinks that justification is a good justification for using a number other than 10, basically, we would propose a 3 instead of a 2, but should it go all the way up to a 10, I guess is the question.
But Daisy, you have a hand up, and
Yeah, I also look at this study, their analysis. I actually agree with 3 because the reason is exactly like what they said. First, it's a human study, so it's not animal study. Second, even with less than 250 ppm. So if you use 2, it's already this concentration already did not associate with increased symptomology. It means it's the same symptom as the no L, the low L. Oh yeah. It's the same, it's this 133.9, it's already didn't associate any increase, it's already protected, and you use a 3, it's even lower than that. So I think they use a very good, it's a good justification. That's why we also use, sometimes if we have to study, and if we do that, it's not symptom, it's not like you see even worse or something. To me, I think it's justified. This reasoning also is a human study, and it's not, I look at your effect, it was like a headache, all the stuff. So to me, I think a 3 is good. That's what my judgment. It could, other people could say differently. Yeah, I just want to say this, their arguments is fine with me. Yeah.
Daisy. And I missed, like, where does the 3 come from?
It's an increase from so Texas was using a 2, and 3 comes from the idea that that's it's a more common increment among authoritative sources than a 2. Like most people
The
use
3 and the 10
use a
are
log
both-
of 3. Yeah, it's usually a 3 or a 10
okay.
and not a 2, or technically square root of 10,
Yeah,
which we
rounded
usually
up to,
often round to a 3.
yeah, okay. Thank you. All right, well, thank you, Daisy. Other ATSAC folks? Yeah, John Boudreau?
Yeah, I would go with a 10 on this one. I don't think the TCEQ justification is sufficient. And that's just what I'm used to using, like I said, there's pretty much no wiggle room in the OEA non-cancer guidelines. If it's chronic, it's a 10.
Thanks, John. Other Johns, Susan?
Yeah, back to my original point. We have a 1 or a 10. So I mean, if you want to keep it as a 2 or a 3, the rationale just can't cite the authoritative sources because we don't apply no AL to low AL that way.
I'd be more comfortable with a 10.
Because to me, it's kind of a guess. You don't have a no AL, so you're thinking, well, 2's okay. Well, we don't know. I mean, it's subjective symptomology. I mean, I don't know.
And
Okay.
John Vandenberg, it sounds like you said you lean towards 10.
Yeah, it's the study's not that old, 1996. I mean, it's almost 30 years old, but 110 exposed and 67 unexposed. That's not a huge study. Though it does list as high quality. I'm looking here on page 25, where they have a nice kind of capturing the summary here. Faint feelings and nausea, that's pretty direct neurotoxic to me. So I would go with a 10.
And I guess you used a phrase earlier around most protective health standard, and is there a consequence of moving from 2 to 10 as it relates to that?
For sure. Would make the ultimate TRV lower by that same factor. So
Right, so, I mean, it's not my job to give you guidance, but it's from hearing that, right, sounding like you're gonna lower the value from a protective health standpoint. It's consistent with what other authoritative sources apply, and it doesn't sound like you have a strong enough rationale right here to do something different. I think that's what I'm taking away from the group. I mean, Daisy, you had suggested you could do a 3. Susan, thoughts? I know you deferred to the regulators last time, but just now that you've heard the conversation, any other?
Yeah, I would be comfortable with a 10.
okay. Noted.
What did you do for N-hexane, or you got to turn to that next?
I'm gonna do that next. Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
So we looked that one up too. So starting here. So wait a second. Oh, shoot, I'm not in the place I thought I was. Sorry to make everyone dizzy. Just a sec. Look away for a minute until I find the spot. Is this it? Well, okay. It's a little bit further up still. Here we go. Okay, so if you've been covering your eyes now, you can look again. So the critical effect for N-hexane was a developmental effect. In mice, it was a. Wait, is this right? Sorry, I'm going to unshare for a second to make sure I'm in the right place. Oh, I was too far down. The 24-hour one. Okay, sorry, here we go. Thanks for bearing with me. So this is the critical effect for N-hexane for this 24-hour one, 24-hour REV was developmental effects. It was a change in fetal weight was the critical effect. And when they describe their justification for going from a low L to a no L using 2 instead of a 10, here's their justification for this one. I'll read it out loud. So a higher uncertainty factor was not used because the reduction in fetal weight, 7%, was in males only and only marginally above 5%, and which I guess was their cutoff. And NOELs identified from other similar studies for developmental endpoint are at or greater than the minimal low L of 1,000 parts per million. So they're sort of saying it was males only, and it was just barely outside their sort of cutoff for significance for change in fetal body weight. Is that enough to start talking about it for the group?
Let's see, it's the same conceptual conversation, but I'd like to, does the rationale articulated align with the value used? John Vandenberg?
Well, I think it's helpful to see the whole set of adjustments there. 10 for intraspecies, of course, makes sense. 3 because they did a dosimetric adjustment, that's pretty typical. Jumping down to UF database, incomplete database. 2-gen study, multiple analyses. I don't know the details of all that, but I guess in this case, probably 3 would be possible. I don't know. I always, like John Stanek said, we've always used 10, so I'm just kind of surprised by that, but to mull it over.
But don't we typically have 10% body weight changes? Is it different for fetal, reproductive, developmental?
I think so. For fetal, we always use 5%. So for
Okay.
developmental, we use a lower. For adult, we use like 10%.
Yeah. You want to finish your comment, John? Does that change John Stanek?
I was just curious. I guess I was just wondering if it was 10, it's probably no L, but since it's fetal, I guess since it's reproductive developmental, I don't have enough expertise here to know what we would do with that. I'm back also to the default. I mean, whatever choice is made, it's fine. It's just the application of a 3 for this specific UF would not be what we would do. That's really the broader point of both examples, is making sure the language is okay.
John, would you use a UFD of 3, or would you say that really I mean, it's got
we wouldn't change the UF from a low L to no L. I mean, there's a lot of justification that's needed historically for us to even use the word minimal.
Right. No, I'm asking about the
You know what I mean? Like, you could describe the effect as minimal, but that may not be enough to move off an uncertainty factor. And especially if it's a reproductive developmental study, I don't even know how much more you'd have to have for that.
I mean, I guess my question is about the application of the database uncertainty factor here of 3.
Oh.
Is that you've got several repro developmental studies, including a 2-gen study for different.
Oh, that's probably enough to get. That's probably enough to get that to a 3. if they're good studies, yeah.
Well, a 3 or a 1. That's my question.
Oh.
Is whether that would be a 1 and then you have the UFL as a 10.
Oh, well, they're saying there's an incomplete database. I don't know where else that would be. For them, anyway.
Boudreaux, you came off mute.
Yeah, well, this is kind of like looking at the TCEQ's package because, for example, if Wheel was doing this, you probably wouldn't use a database uncertainty factor at all because you've got the repro developmental studies. But on the other hand, for an acute rel, you'd wind up using a Noel of 6 for a mild effect, 10 for a severe effect. The question would be is, do you consider that reduction in fetal body weight to be a mild effect or a severe effect? So that's a wobbler. How important is a reduction in fetal body weight? I mean, I don't think I'd go with less than a 6 in this case. And I could definitely be argued into a 10.
Would you have a database of nothing? You wouldn't have it at 1?
I would probably put the database at 1, given that you do have a couple of reproductive developmental studies.
That was kind of my view of it as well. It's like, well, wait a minute, you got several studies, including a 2-gen study, multiple species in inhalation. So you got the right route of exposure. You've got multiple studies. I'm not sure why they used a 3 really.
Yeah, that was something I missed. I forgot about this was acute, which, we don't really have procedures here too much for that.
Yeah.
I could agree with that, with the database till 1.
So in some ways it'd be like the uncertainty factor for human variability interspecies is 10. 3 for interspecies makes sense because they're using a dosimetric adjustment. And then a 10 for everything else, which is the low L to no L. And I would have said a 1 for the database myself.
Okay.
That's helpful.
That's really helpful. Yeah. What do others think about that proposal?
So it would be a total uncertainty factor of 300.
Right.
10,
Yeah.
3, 10.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how I would have done it, but based only on this quick summary that we're seeing here.
Other thoughts, Daisy?
Yeah, I think I honestly, anyway, it's fine. It just, I think maybe DQ, you can just define it. Like John said, if EPA's default is 110, and you can just define this like our agency adopt or whatever, and then you can use 10, like JV said 10, and then just get rid of a database uncertainty factor. So the value is not really changing much. Even you use string, it's very similar.
Yeah.
So yeah, in this case, you can either way, you can keep the database uncertainty factor and then use a lower to no ring. But that way, it's more like you kind of inconsistent introduce. If the above case you use 10, then this case. But of course, there's another thing here, acute chronic. So yeah, and I think either way is fine. It's just define in a way, maybe think about how to be more consistent. Or just say discussion from ATSAC member. That's all fine. Either way, I think it's fine.
So I do think moving the low L to no L adjustment factor to 10 in both cases would, I mean, that's consistent between the two at least.
Right.
Like in both cases, we went to 10. The other change in this case would be that we think the 2-gen study probably means you don't need a database uncertainty factor. So that would go to 1. So
yeah, that's maybe
Yeah.
simple. You can just in your, like a description, you said that your default, in this case, your default lower to no, unless there's a strong evidence. That's why when we do analysis, of course, we agree. We always use 10. That's our default. But we do sometimes use, like even similar rational. But we are like also a bunch of scientists, like 8-10 scientists discuss, and then we finalize. So either way, really not going to make a huge difference. Just we decided, the majority vote decided then go this way. We just explain. So I think you can just in the note explain, the rationale. That's all you need to do. Yeah.
So
But I say that the multiple species inhalation bioassay 2-gen study right there, to me, if development is the key critical endpoint, then really a database uncertainty factor of 3 isn't necessary. So I think it's consistency's sake, plus it provides a foundation for saying that the database is a 1.
Yeah. Okay.
OHA, you have what you need from that?
That's
I
great.
think we've heard everything we need to. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you. All those. That was helpful. So let's bring the slides back up. So we're going to move into section 5. So Holly, do you want to again give a overview of the questions? So there's other types of adjustments. This is table 4.
Yeah, so section 5 is a little bit of a catch-all for when we were trying to categorize and organize everything in this document. So question number 5 is, do you have feedback or concerns about cases where DEQ proposes to derive TRVs by making other types of modifications to values developed by other agencies? And so this is table 4 on page 22, and you can kind of take a look through here and see what comes up for you. We can pause for a minute too while everyone takes a look.
Is that reference table 5 too? Are they connected? The big long list of stuff?
This is section 5, table 4 on page 22. And table 5 is also in this section as well.
Yeah. Okay.
And I will say the next question we have coming up is on the PAHs. So the PAHs will come up next.
So same process. So starting with kind of reflections, concerns.
Yeah, this section 5, I'll just say that was our miscellaneous category, really. Like these were adjustments that didn't seem like they fit very well in other categories that we had. So that's why the narratives are longer, because there's not like repeating information from previous entries.
David, if you could help me look in workbook 2 where I should be looking here to look at the actual entry there for benzoate pyrene. Where would that be?
Yes, just a minute. Oh, it might be only in the appendix.
Yeah, I didn't see it in the appendix. That's why I'm kind of looking. I couldn't see what I wanted to look at, the actual analysis here.
I think, is it on row 184 of the appendix, tab 5 for cancer?
Row 184.
That's it. Yeah, row 184 and 185.
I was looking under the B alphabetical from the top. That's why I couldn't find it. Thank you.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So some of the ones that are in groups like pHs or otherwise, are in a different order.
Okay, thank you.
Would you like me to share my
No,
screen of it?
I see it here.
Okay.
I got it.
For attendees or anyone else, like this is in tab 5, appendix cancer all in workbook 2. That's the tab it's on, rows 184 and 185.
Would it help, Dave, if we shared document 4 since it's such a miscellaneous category? You know, like look
In
at
the
table
chat again?
or just on the screen, even of scrolling through table 4 and just there's not that many, right?
Sure, yeah.
And maybe just saying like why it didn't fit into the other ones. I don't know if that's helpful to anybody, but
But yeah, it seems like working through each one and just talking through it likely is helpful. So I don't know if you want to just go line by line, starting with benzopyrene and saying kind of this is how it got into this space and how you're approaching it.
Yeah, I guess because the whole next question is all about PAHs, of which benzoapyrene is one, like maybe
save that.
for this, maybe save that one, but for
Okay.
For this question, like maybe anything else in this table 4 that stands out. Boron trichloride was a little complicated because it separates into, it's a molecular weight adjustment because it separates into 3 molecules of hydrogen chloride.
I can start on this table.
Yep.
Okay.
So I have some comments on this one, boron trichloride.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's I agree. I just like your calculation, the formula, the acute. You started with equals 2247. This value should be more like at the end, not at the beginning. It's just like, to me, equal like your formula just follows like a 2247 should be before the equal sign at the last one, right?
Oh,
I don't know. Yeah, it feel like
here?
yeah, this one should be go to 2100 times 1.07 equals 2247, then approximately 2200. Isn't that supposed to this way?
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Yeah. It feel like
So
you repeat the value. Yeah. And same as the chronic one.
Okay.
And then for the hydrogen, I actually disagree with your, all the other I agree, whatever I just say, disagree. So I think it's because this is a short-term study. So you are developed acute. So you don't need to do the duration adjustment anymore. I think they did. The reason is because they did the duration adjustment. I guess the exposure is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's why, if you're 24 hours divided by 24 hours, 7 days per week divided by 7 days per week. So you didn't see the calculation there. So I think it's you are using a short-term or subchronic, to derive the acute. You don't need to do any adjustment. That's what my take. Others can comment.
This is for the acute. This is for the acute boron trichloride.
Yeah, for hydrogen.
Oh, hydrazine.
Yeah. For the acute hydrogen. Because
you
are using a short term to derive acute.
Okay, so you would say we don't need to do this
you do.
Haber's law adjustment.
Because I look at this, I think they did the adjustment. It's not they didn't do. They just adjust. It just I think the study was 24 hours exposure continuously for 6 months.
Yeah.
So when they do adjustment, it will be all 1-1. For the hour and for the daily adjustment, weekly adjustment will be all equals 1. And also you're using short term. It's already you know, to derive acute. It's not the other way around. So I don't think you need to adjust the duration anymore. And on the workbook Excel sheet, the DAF is not a RGDR. They actually only adjust for inhalation rate. I don't know, it's kind of old, or it's 1996. It's kind of old. The methodology is different from the recent, IFC methods. So what they do is they in a minute of ventilation divided by the body weight. That's actually, we call inhalation rate. It's like, cubic meter inhaled per kilogram per day. So they actually didn't do the regional, the RGDR is for like a port-elementary effect as well as for systemic effect. It's a regional dose, the normalization factor is a surface area. So your different part of a respiratory tract. So you call it RGDR, I think, maybe just say breathing rate, adjust by breathing rate. It's not RGDR per se.
Okay.
In the workbook too, yeah.
Yeah, I got that.
That's why my take is, I think this one is, I don't think you need adjustment.
Okay.
So
The other is, yeah. The other is.
just a quick comment. I think along those lines, Daisy, it would be useful here to do what you've done on the other examples and actually show the equation written out. So it's as clear as possible as to what you actually did.
Okay. I mean,
Yeah.
I did reference, it's equation 4 from up at the top, like up in section 2, like that was the formula. But if we don't do the adjustment, then this would, I mean, basically this would come out of workbook, out of this document, right? Like it would end up not being in document 4. Hydrazine would end up not being in document 4 anymore if we take out this adjustment.
Oh,
Yeah, you just use adopt the short term for your acute.
Yeah.
So
You can move this one to the duration one. It's just because you don't need, the duration, remember you remove the 5-7, but this one, because it's a 7-7.
Right. There's no adjustment. Right. And so
You
yeah,
can adjust. It's just you divide by 1, you remove the 7-7. You just put it in the above table, like do 7-7, because you have like 5-7, 6-7. This one is just 7-7.
okay. But ultimately that number would be, we would be adopting exactly ATSGR's number, which is not an adjustment. So it would just,
is different. You still divide by 7-7.
okay.
Yeah, you just move there because it's the same category. Use a short term, you adjust for the week, days per week. And so it's in that category. It's just the value didn't change it because it's a 7 days per week, it adjusts to also 7 days per week to humans. So. And I think, let me see, I have in the last table is like, do we reserve it or,
Yeah, we're saving, there's a separate question, discussion question for the last
that's
table.
all the other, I'm okay. I look at each case, I kind of agree. Yeah, I don't have any other question.
Thank you.
And just so hydrazine, am I hearing that the proposal is basically that it goes back to like the ATSDR authoritative source, and that's the alignment, and so it doesn't actually fit in this part of the is that what I'm hearing?
There's two ways. Like one way we could move it to table 2 up at the top of this document and just say that weekly adjustment, instead of being like 5 out of 7 days, is 7 out of 7 days, which like the effect of that is that the number is going to be exactly the same as the ATSGR intermediate MR. It'll be an unadjusted number basically. So, but the other way we could do it is to take it out of this document altogether and just put ATSGR as the authoritative source.
Yeah, and I guess does it matter one way for you, one way or other?
Maybe better to do, at least you actually do duration adjustment. Just one. I think that because it's technically, it's a short term or intermediate. It's not really acute.
Divide by a 1. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
but
yeah,
we,
so
we
divided
also
by one,
discussed the,
yeah.
like, whether it's okay to adopt this one. So I think it's better to just move to the take two. That's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, John Vandenberg.
I would actually agree with that because I think that's also protective. So I would go with that.
Okay, it is definitely a lower number, a health protective number.
That's right.
Good. John Boudreau, John Stanek, Susan, any agreement, disagreement?
Agreement.
Okay.
Agreement, and I would agree with moving it to table 2, just so that it's clear that, you know, that duration was considered.
Okay.
Thanks. John Stanek?
Yep, agree.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so that's for hydrazine. Is there other examples folks want to talk through, or Dave, you want to move? Are there any ones that you want to reflect back to the group on?
No, I think the next section is big to talk about the PAHs. So want to get all the non-PAH
Yeah, if there's
ideas
any
out of the way. Yeah.
Yeah, any other non-PAH examples that we want to work through? Otherwise, we can move into that conversation. So I guess just for the ones that don't fall in that category. John Vandenberg?
I'm good with all the rest. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, not hearing any or seeing any unmutes or hands up. Why don't we move into the PAH conversation? So do you want to, yeah, thanks, Holly. You want to tee it up?
Yep. Okay, so this is specific to the PAHs in this section. Do you have any feedback or concerns about DEQ using the list of relative potency factors provided by the Minnesota Department of Health for carcinogenic PAHs? To be specific, using the 2017 IRIS IUR for benzoapyrene as the index.
I'm gonna add the link to that Minnesota document in the chat for
Perfect.
listeners.
Thank you.
The only this is John Van. The only comment I have is I would add benzoapyrene here, so that you see that it's the basis for the others. If I'm understanding this.
You mean add that like to that table?
Yeah, as a one. Yeah.
Okay.
All these are relative to benzoapyrene, right? So
Yeah.
benzoapyrene, you see what it's all relative to. It's sort of missing right there.
Yeah, good point. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe
that's
also
easy to do.
bold the index chemical. That's what.
Yeah, index chemical. There you go. In the notes, you could just say this is the index chemical.
Yeah.
So I actually do have a question. So I saw you write this like you said, you know, when you have some comments on the DQ notes, like first chemical, you said the TRV updated from 2018 value. Because all value used the same RPF, but applied to the all dated OEHA IUR or benzobar rather than the new. So and then you the other column you said the MDH adopt OEHA's RPF. I'm kind of confused. So one you said use all the RPF value, and the other you said your MDH adopt the OEHA's RPF value. So some confusing here. I don't know. See if
Okay. Yeah. So so I guess the
so
first
it just here, just maybe more clear. So TRV, updated from the 2018 value because all value use the same RPF, same as what? Which one? As your 2018 or as your
same as 2018 is what I meant. Yeah. So there's not a proposed change to the RPF.
okay.
The proposed change is to apply that RPF to the index chemical benzoapyrene to the newer to the IRIS 2017 benzoapyrene instead of OEHA's value
Okay.
for benzoapyrene, which
Okay,
is a little older.
so when you hear say MDH adopt or it has a RPF, that's still 2018, right? It's not now. So because you said that your RPF is old as in 2018, but here you say, to me, like it given me an impression like you kind of, in this one, you adopt a new RPF. I know you try to say the RPF apply to a new IRS, the slope factor.
IUR.
Yeah, but when you the next column you said adopt or you have a RPF, it given me an impression you kind of have a new RPF.
Yeah,
So your
Oh,
RPF
I see.
is the old,
right.
It just gives me this confusion, like
Yeah.
which so
Yeah,
yeah.
it's
Thank
like,
you.
yeah, I guess what's confusing is that Minnesota's adoption of OEHA's
Yeah,
RPF is not, that isn't new. Like it implies that that's a new situation, and that's
Yeah,
not
yeah,
new. Like they
yeah.
adopted it a long time
Yeah,
ago.
yeah, yeah. That's what
Yeah.
given me the impression you have a new RPF and then you have a new slope effect. But you said that it's the same old RPF, so that's a confusing, at least to me.
Yeah.
I actually I'm okay with you use Minnesota's RPF
And is
because like your rational said, they incorporate other agents. I'm not a PH guy, so.
But is that
Thanks
is
so
that the
much.
fundamental question, right? Is the first fundamental question is Minnesota Department of Health as the kind of source? Is that kind of the first overall question y'all are asking? Like, are we comfortable, right? Because that's the authoritative source that would be used.
I'm okay. I'm not really expert in PAH. So, but based on your, reasoning provider, I'm
Yeah,
okay with.
the way that most everybody handles PAHs is that it's a complex, it's a mixture of similar chemicals, and they have potencies. They all have the same mode of action in carcinogenicity, and so their toxicity is all relative to an index chemical, benzoapyrene being that index. And so I guess the two things are like we're proposing to continue using IRIS's 2017 IUR for benzoapyrene. And then the second thing we're proposing is that the relative potency factors for all the rest of the PAHs we're getting from this Minnesota Department of Health guidance document. And we're applying those relative potency factors to the 2017 IRIS IUR for benzoapyrene.
Yeah, I understand. except this language thing, I'm okay with
Thank
it.
you. So I guess
So,
yeah.
just a follow-up question. So since the RPFs didn't change, but you're using a new source now, so were you using a different source previously?
So those ones on the table that have the note that says the TRV updated, that has in that furthest right column,
Table
in those
5.
cases, in table 5,
Yeah.
yes, the ones that have comments in the far right column, the thing that changed was previously in 2018, we were inadvertently, wasn't really aware that this is what we were doing. We just adopted California values, IURs directly for those PAHs, and didn't realize that that's what was happening. So what the change now for those ones is that we're applying the same relative potency factor that California was using and that Minnesota's using, but now we're applying it to we're applying that to that newer IRIS 2017 IUR for benzoapyrene instead of to the older OEHA IUR for benzoapyrene. So a different value for the index chemical. We're just making sure that they're all applied to the same index value for the same index chemical. Sorry, that was so confusing.
So for the other ones, which were, utilizing an RPF,
those ones aren't changing.
Those ones aren't changing. The RPF isn't changing. The source of information has always been the same.
Right, and the index, and they've always been indexed to the correct
To the iris value.
IUR, to the iris value. Yeah.
Okay.
So what you're saying was like somehow someone made a mistake in your old version, use two different, sober facts in
That's right.
calculations.
That's right. We weren't, we didn't realize that we were applying that to an old IUR for benzoate-pyrene.
Okay, got it.
Other thoughts on approach? Well, maybe I'll just ask the bigger question. Are folks kind of, can you affirm agreement with the approach? Just love to hear from everyone if there's any other comments or if you agree with kind of the way that this is structured and set up with a reference to Minnesota Department of Health. John Vandenberg,
I'm good.
John Boudreau,
I'm also good.
thank you. Daisy, it sounds like you're good. And Susan, you had commented. John Stanek, any final thoughts?
Agree.
Okay. Awesome. OJ, anything else that you would ask?
No,
That's
but
great.
this was really helpful though, to see where our narrative was confusing or people are
Exactly,
following
yeah.
along. So we definitely know what to write and add to our narrative. So thank you.
Right. So I'm gonna, we have 7, 8, 9 that we could maybe try to get through today. We'll see how ambitious that is. So same thing. So we're gonna move into TRVs without modification. Yep, Holly, wanna tee it up?
Yep. Yep. And I'll say this is like the last one on a specific section of the document. The last two on this document are kind of wrap up final thoughts on our overall work. So this one, question number 7, do you have feedback or concerns about any of the TRVs that DEQ is proposing to adopt without modification from non-authoritative, so the not EPA, ATSDR, or Cal EPA sources? So this is section 6, which starts on page 31. And we are referring to, looks like, table 6 in
Table
this
6.
document. It says
should-
table 7,
It
but
should be
obviously
table 7, sorry.
we
But
have an error.
It's table 6, so we know what the reference is, at least in the document. And then is there anything you want to add around why and what was unique about this set of chemical compounds? Like, why didn't you apply other things? Like, why are you using sources?
I can give a little lead into it. So these are anything that doesn't come from from EPA, ATSGR, or Cal EPA is going to have to be classified as a DEQ, as authoritative source, in consultation with ATSAC. And so when we were looking at those other places like TCEQ or Minnesota, in the cases you've seen so far in the document, we've mostly liked what they did, but felt we needed to modify it somehow to make it a better fit for Oregon. In these cases, in this table, these are ones that we felt that came from some other source besides the sources in rule, but that we didn't feel like we needed to adjust. So these ones we sort of proposed to adopt kind of straight up as presented by those other sources.
And then
So like on the first row, the tert-butyl alcoholic, if you click on the TCEQ link, like it will say exactly 15,000 micrograms per cubic meter in their document, as opposed to some modification that we've made to it.
And I guess, I think John Vandenberg's asked this a couple times. So these you have, I can't count and my eyes don't read small. This is, you looked beyond what's referenced. Is that accurate? Right. So is this another process that like ERG might have looked kind of at a national 50 state and then found the most applicable, most relevant?
That's true. That's true for the PAHs that are in here. Or sorry, not PAHs, the PFAS. For the PFAS, that is the case. The ERG did a kind of a national search for the methyl naphthalenes. That's the case. For the rest of them, that's not the case. We found values with TCEQ. One reason that TCEQ comes up a lot is because they do actually do a really good job of documentation. Like their documents are very clear and it's easy to see what they did. Like, like we've shown, like sometimes we felt the need to make a modification to what they had, but in all cases they do a really good job of documenting. So it's easy to see where we might want to make an adjustment or not. Like in this case, in this table, we did not feel like we needed to make additional modification.
Yeah, I guess I was just like, how do you get to Minnesota, New Jersey, Michigan, and not New York, Connecticut, New Jersey? So John, I'm just like channeling some of the questions you've asked earlier, but we don't have to go too far down that path. So I think the fundamental question still stands, right? Or you have concerns either on the source or the kind of approach that was used to pull these sources from that you see here. And I guess like, ultimately you're asking, right, like it's not a data question. This is really like a source question, right? You're referencing these sources. Are they good sources? Do you have any concerns with those sources that will ultimately be kind of the values that you see here? John Boudreau?
Yeah, just out of curiosity, I think at some point in this entire conversation, there was a mention of international values potentially, like the EU, for example, has got a number of countries that publish equivalent values, and nothing came up from there.
No, you can see more details in the it's labeled as document 9 in the list of links. I can put that link again in the chat here really quick for everybody. But there were some values that they found, like from Health Canada or European Union, but between the options that were available, it seemed like the ones that we chose had the most documentation, or it met with our criteria the best. Some of our criteria were that we wanted the derivation information to be like public and transparent so that anyone could find it. We wanted it to not be derived from occupational exposure limits directly, like an OSHA value that is like some places will take like an OSHA value and divide by 100 or something, or
Right.
and we didn't want to do that. And some states have like a rule where they can derive a value based on an LC50 or an LD50, and we tried to steer clear of those also. So the ones that are left are ones that are kind of true de novo derivations from a comprehensive literature review, from a point of, traditional point of departure. And yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for that question. Let's go Daisy and then John Van Werken.
Yeah, I think so. Dave, what you just said, maybe put a little bit of, like John previously mentioned, put a little more description here, because then we have some idea, like you say, maybe your contract to ERG did what, and then your selection criteria to include, TCEQ, whatever, whatever you just said, maybe put a little bit in before the table. And then also, I think I just finished my comments, so obviously, so also DEQ consider of adequate derivation quality to adopt without modification. Just maybe expand a little bit, that above the sections above you do some kind of justification on duration, uncertainty fact. So maybe here just elaborate a little bit further, like how you consider more adequate. So, I think you should have, you don't see the necessary to adjust. You can say this like conform, default, set whatever parameter used by the authority, sources. So something just elaborate a little further. So we kind of know, why you, pick this. So, and the other comments I have is like, I saw you have some like, two TRVs or two, like, say for the PFBA, you have a chronic from TCEQ, acute from Minnesota. Is that because, you know, like, Minnesota don't have a chronic? That's why you pick the chronic? I don't know. I saw you have like sometimes two, you know, source for different duration, you know, different TRVs.
Yeah, like so in many cases that happened, that like where one agency would have an acute value but not a chronic, and the other one would have a chronic or not and not an acute.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to clarify. Yeah, that's all I have.
Yeah.
You know, I think I just put some of your reasoning at the beginning. So, you know, like, you know, you just, like you say, you don't use those like from LC 15, you know, to derive. Yeah, otherwise I'm fine. Thank you.
Thank you, John Vandenberg.
Thank you. I just have comments about two of these. I got to get back to wherever I was here. The one is lead, and the way that the process works for the National Ambient Air Quality Standards is that for lead, it's a quarterly average across 3 years. And the reason it's a long-term average and not an acute value is because of the nature of the health effects, which tend, you know, neurological typically. The second point is the NAAQS is based on a really significant database, and so it's really focused on an adequate margin of safety in the Clean Air Act, whereas the air toxics are all based on an ample margin of safety to reflect that typically greater uncertainty and oftentimes the nature of the health outcomes. So my question here is, I'm not sure that there is a need for an acute value, and setting the acute value equal to the long-term, which really truly in the NAAQS program is a long-term average, you know, I don't know that that's actually needed. And so my question is, do you need an acute value for lead?
We've applied it because it is conservative. Like it's pretty health protective because it's like you say, that value is designed for a 3-month rolling average, and we're applying it to a 24-hour period. We do have a lot of. It seems like we do have a lot of. Well, I'll see if JR wants to say anything about this, but we do have a fair amount of facilities where there's like nearby, you know, pretty nearby residents that you know, because this is meant to apply also to like an area, NAAQS are meant to be applied to like a whole airshed, as opposed to like a concentrated area right next to a source. This is my understanding. Like so one reason we like to have this as the acute value is so that we have that protection for people who are living very near a source of lead, as opposed to just someone who's out in the general airshed. And because we're applying it in an acute scenario as opposed to like the 3-month rolling average, that is pretty health protective for those folks. Do you want to say any more about that, JR?
I concur. I agree. That's why it is important for us. We do surprisingly have a lot of sources of lead exposure.
Well, that's actually appropriate to hear, because on the national level, the higher lead areas are actually off the end of runways for planes that are using leaded gasoline for prop planes, you know, with the internal combustion engine. So that's really what you're seeing nationally. But you're pointing to, and I think it's very appropriate for the air toxics, which tends to be more locally focused on a place-based. So, and I'm not familiar with the sources there, but it sounds like you've got some that you're very aware of or concerned. So, okay. So thank you for the description of that. The second one that I'm interested in is the one that follows that, manganese and compounds. So the DEQ 2024 manganese memo, I just clicked on it. I realize it's a pretty thorough evaluation of the manganese data, which I haven't had a chance to read that, and I sure would like to. Does it derive just an acute or also a chronic, or is the chronic somewhere else?
Well, just so you know, like that is from our previous meeting, like ATSAC meeting number 3, when we had a whole meeting about manganese. And
This just
that,
shows I can't remember anything apparently.
and so this is,
It was a while ago.
so that memo is our formal write-up after we had all of our conversations with
Okay.
you, like with ATSAC.
Okay.
So
that's
if you do
what
read it,
we had
it's
talked about. Okay.
so once you start reading it, it should seem really familiar, hopefully.
Okay. Okay.
And it is
Yeah.
acute, right, to clarify.
Yeah,
Yes.
for acute.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or cute. Okay.
Right, and that was after that petition. So we got the petition on the acute TRV for manganese, and then that was, the memo is like the final wrap up. We put together the framing document and you all looked at it, and we had a bunch of email exchanges. And then as a result of all of those exchanges, we wrote this memo. So that's in there.
Okay. So apparently I have too many chemicals in my head here, so I forgot
We all
completely
do.
about that. So
That
Okay.
exposure.
all right. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Daisy, you had popped on screen. Did you want to jump in?
Actually, I just want to tell John, I think they have, you guys have the chronic, right? I remember the acute was originally, derived from chronic, then, yeah, we have a discussion and decide that one. I
Yeah,
think it's asking if we have if you guys have a chronic.
we do have a chronic value, and the reason that the chronic value for manganese isn't in this document is because we're just using like I can't remember if it's the ATSDR or the IRIS value, chronic value kind of as is, where this we had to no one had an acute value, so we had to derive one, which you helped us with in that meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I think I saw you say blank cells. Originally I also didn't know. Then I saw there's a blank cells in table 7 indicate whatever. Then I see you like you. Yeah.
Well, you all can go back and check your work, I guess, from 2024 if you so desire. But that is the conversation and the reference point. And I guess I'm curious if folks are seeing anything that raises any concern. These are all additional sources, so. Are folks good as we're moving forward, Susan?
I don't have any concerns. I just wanted to ask, because I wasn't going to try to go back and find these individually, but in the workbooks, when these are reported, if you scroll out to the right and there's links to sources, are these the sources that are in this table? Are they the ones that are linked to in the workbook?
Yes. Yeah, that's right. So we linked whenever DEQ is listed as the authoritative source in the workbooks. Usually the links go out to we reference document 4 because that's where we talk about how we might have tweaked it or whatever, but the link goes to the original source of the source that we started from. So like if we use a TCEQ doc value, but we modified an uncertainty factor, we'll reference it in document 4, but the link in the workbook will take you to TCEQ to where that point of departure came from.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I just like I said, every time I look at workbook 2, I learn more about what's in there, but keeping up with all of the documentation and understanding where the values came from. It's really nicely laid out in this document, but having those links in the workbook too are helpful. So thank you.
Good feedback, structural feedback, and also it's a big lift. A reminder, it's a big lift what y'all have been asked to do. Thank you, Susan. So at the risk of moving us on, I'm going to have an ambitious mindset, although it may be over ambitious, that we can get through 2 more questions. But before I do, any other final comments on this piece? Okay. Not seeing any. We kind of have 2, and as Holly said, that was the deep dive into really specific questions. Want to move into kind of 2 questions that are a bit higher level. Holly, you want to introduce question 8? Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have enough time, don't you, Dave? Are you?
Okay.
I don't have like a bunch of next step slides at the end. I'm just gonna go over the date of the next meeting. And we're happy to revisit this question next time too. We don't want to rush at all. So, but I could introduce this one and see how much time we have left. So question number 8 here is pending DEQ and OHA consideration of everything we've heard from you all on this document so far. Do you agree with the TRVs where DEQ in consultation with ATSAC is the proposed authoritative source? We're trying to get final thoughts on the whole overall process and the work that we put forward in this document.
Yeah, so why don't we do this?
Especially on these ones where where DQ is the source, right? This is the one where it's really critical for us to sort of have the consultation with ATSAC to say, like, yes, go forward with these.
Well, y'all are going to go into a public and political process that you're going to have folks yelling at you, so you want to have some confidence, right? So why don't we do a roundtable, right? This is really, again, as I said, kind of not just an affirmation that you feel confident, and with the caveat that was you saw on the slide that there's been a lot of discussion and some edits and changes, guidance that OHA DEQ has received. So maybe we can do a roundtable at the high level where y'all have given input, where DEQ can land as the authoritative source, kind of affirming that you feel confident moving forward. Daisy?
Yes, I'm confident. Yeah.
Okay.
I think of what we discussed, we look at everything. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Daisy. I'll just go in order that I can see. Susan?
Yes, I confirm.
Okay.
With everything that we've discussed, and most of it's been at the process level, but even getting down to some of the specific examples.
Great, thank you. JV?
Yes, I agree. I think that the discussion has been very useful, and I concur with the TRVs where DEQ is the proposed authoritative source in consultation with ATSAC.
Thank you. JB?
Agreed. I think the process is quite good, and I essentially agree with it.
Awesome, thank you. And then last but not least, JS, John Stanek.
Yes, I agree. I agree with the way the proposal is put together and the outlines and moving forward.
Awesome. And so, well, okay, my ambition feels like it's going in the right direction, because the ninth question, and that kind of concludes where we'll be in terms of document 4, is really feedback. And I don't know how it just kind of speaks for itself, right? So
Yeah.
If there's any additional feedback, I know y'all just kind of affirmed that you have confidence here, but is there anything else, Holly, that you'd be looking for in terms of folks' reflection?
We added this as a catch-all, knowing that our questions might have not encompassed everything you were thinking as you read through it, and also wanted an extra space if you're doing written comments to us at the end where you could plop in extra information. So if you don't have anything today, that's okay, but definitely if you think of other things and want to provide it in writing, this is a great spot as well. Yeah, Daisy?
Yeah, I would make just comments, just like on the spot. So I was, during our discussion, we kind of realized, not really we know all these different agents default stuff. I think you made a table before, right? With last time manganese or whatever. I think maybe it's good for you to make a table, for each of the default setting, like uncertainty fact, whatever, from EPA or EHA, ATSDR, and then the DEQ, what's kind. So maybe it's something like this for the future, you kind of follow, and then you also can, in this document, you have several places you can actually references to this table. So, it's like you thought the minor effect is 3, but, like John said, EPA never do 3 unless absolutely necessary. And, it's some kind, I think it's all there, then it's easy for, to see. That will be thinking it's good because you are using this stream, main agency as your, good resource. So, yeah.
Thank you.
John Vandenberg, I just have, maybe we should have understood this before, but why does it say we're DEQ versus DEQ and OHA? Can you help me understand why this is just one part of the organization? Because Dave and Holly, you're both JR, I think.
No, and
JR is DEQ. What's the
keep
difference
saying
there?
DEQ OHA, but it really DEQ's the responsible partner. JR speak on behalf of the agency.
Yeah, I'm actually the toxicologist here. Dave and Holly are just actors. So it is because the rule is housed in the Department of Environmental Quality. And so all of these standards are used in our agency. And it's interesting, our rules actually call out an interagency collaboration. Because we do have toxicologists and risk assessors, but they tend to, lean more towards the risk assessor, and we don't have. So we've got a couple. Actually, Sue is on here, and Mike Polson, Sue McMillan, and so, but they have other day jobs, and so Holly and Dave really are the stars of this project. I mean, they are really the ones who have done that, all of the work here. So, but it is because of the way the rules are written. It's just being.
That's.
I
understand. But I would, and I will in my writing acknowledge all of you because it's clearly a team effort. It's been a huge team, so a huge effort.
It is true. It's true.
Yeah,
we've got folks on the DEQ side: Kristen, Martin, Clara Funk, Sue McMillan, Apple, who've all been really pushing. It's been a really big project, but really Dave and actually Holly, I'll say Holly and Dave, really it's just been an outstanding effort from their end. So good question.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, John. I think we actually have a question around how to reference it in our meeting summaries. We say DQ/OHA, but we can sort that out later. Any other kind of final feedback questions? And obviously you all, I don't know if folks have already submitted workbook comments and stuff like that, but if things come up, right, with the caveat that what you all have kind of affirmed is built on the conversations that we've had and the input that you all have already provided and will provide in writing. But any other final thoughts? I feel smarter than I was a couple days ago, so that's a start. So Holly, why don't we talk about next steps? We're going to meet again coming up, and this was kind of part 2. We have a few more questions to work through, but yeah, Holly.
Yeah, so Dana, if we could look at slide 35. I won't give a speech here, but I just wanted to kind of flash the date and time of the next meeting on here. As Ben just said, this is the second of our 3 meetings in this series. And it was great that we got through a lot of document 4 today, and we could kind of move on to document 5 next. And we really did start with the longest document where we needed the most discussion. So hopefully the next documents will take a little bit less time to discuss. But you can see here the next meeting is February 19th, so next Wednesday. And in Pacific time, that's 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. And I'll follow kind of the same structure with a break in the middle. But of course, please reach out if you have any questions, and we would love your kind of final written answers at the end of that next meeting next week. You can definitely take your time after the meeting to polish them up before you send them to us. And in the meantime, our team will be working on those meeting minutes and getting those to you shortly, so you can kind of review everything we're putting in there, and those will be posted online as well. I think that's everything I wanted to say. Is there anything else from the team that I missed or want to say before next time?
Just thank you to ATSAC. It's a lot. I mean, it was a lot of work to put it together, but you all have to read it, and you're volunteers. So I really appreciate the time. I know it was a big lift even to read all that stuff. So thank you so much. And it was I thought it was a very fun conversation today. So
Thanks.
science is the fun part.
Yeah. JR, anything to add?
No, just another big thank you. This is huge for our agencies and for our air program. And so we just really can't thank you enough.
Yeah, thank you. Awesome. Well, with that, we'll give you 5 minutes back in your life from the previous scheduled. Much love. Appreciate everyone. Great conversation. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah, bye.
Thank you.
Bye.